Welcome to Infinite Models. If you like building aircraft, any type of armor, how about prehistoric or current wildlife? Autos of all shapes and sizes and genres, seafaring subjects of all types, and figures, vignettes, and dioramas, then this group was made for you.
During that live, Bo Van Lee, he actually went out and Googled my grandfather's name and then sent me a copy of the link to the manual for courts martial for the years 1941 to 43. And my grandfather was court-martialed in early 1942 for an event, and I'm about to describe it for you. But he went out and I screenshotted the whole thing, and this is the adjudication of his petition for recourse. And this was dated 9 December 44 from the War Department, where it was finally filed. But this was for the court-martial in the case of Second Lieutenant Vincent J Mankowski, serial number 0760705, Air Corps. And it's several pages of all the information and outline on what happened at my grandpa's courts-martial. I'm going to tell you guys the story about how we got to that court-martial and how it got overturned. So, part one of the story was in the future, 1952, flying A-26 invaders in Korea and flying very, very low when he made his strafing runs. So the hard part about flying an attack airplane like that, most people understand if you talk about an airplane in a high angle of attack, that it is nose high. You're still flying in a straight line. You're not climbing, but you're flying in a straight line, nose high. That's a high angle of attack. When you're flying an attack airplane, you have to fly with a low angle of attack and still stay in a straight line without flying down into the ground. So flying an airplane in a nose down attitude with a low AOA in a straight line to attack things is very, very difficult. The wings were not designed to lift that way. The engines and the thrust line were not designed to fly that way. The aircraft was not configured to do that, but yet attack guys learn how to do it. And where do they learn to do it? So here's the prequel, the precursor story to that. When my family on my dad's side came to America, my great-grandfather left Prussia, now commonly known as Poland. Where they lived was in Prussia. And all the male members of my family were either leaders or members of the Royal Prussian Guard, and some were even Prussian hussars. They had very, very long, proud military family history on that side. My great-grandfather was one of the leaders of the Prussian Guard, and him and an uncle who happened to be a hussar, neither of them liked the alliance with Germany and who they called the Little Corporal. Hitler. They did not like that alliance, and so they emigrated. They grabbed the family and just got the heck out of Dodge, and they came to America. Came in through Ellis Island, and the Mankowski family arrived in America. I keep surprising you tonight. Okay. So, when my great-grandfather, Stanislaw, got his application to everything for citizenship, he was granted citizenship, as was his wife, and then the children had to be adjudicated, and the children go through a process as well, but those that are near age of recognition, 18, they have to go through a separate process. And my grandfather at the time, second son, my uncle Stanislaw was his older brother. My grandpa was Vincent John, and he was nearing the age of recognition, and he was basically on, for lack of a better term, a green card. And then he enlisted in the United States Army in 1941. December 7th, 1941 came and went, and so in 41, staying ahead of his peer group. My grandpa was always accelerated for promotion, selections for promotion and other things. And then he was selected for a commissioning program and transferred to the Army Air Corps as an pilot cadet. Got a commission as a second lieutenant and started going through flight school. And he was very good in flight school. And when he and his best friend, who happened to be another second lieutenant by the name of Bert Major and my grandpa, graduated primary flight school together. And the two of them, near the top of their class, were selected for multi-engine secondary school. And they were both very excited about that because the two of them just knew that they were going to get selected to fly that really hot new fighter that was just going into mass production. You all know what I'm talking about. That's right, the Fork-tailed Devil, the P-38 Lightning. They just knew they were going to wind up in Lightnings because they were going through multi-engine school and they were near the top of their class in their primary. So surely, we're the cream of the crop. We're going to get the hottest, newest cream of the crop fighters, right? Hi, John. Good to see you in here tonight from Livingston, Tennessee. I'm wrapping up now telling a story about my grandpa and how he wound up getting in trouble flying so low. So they got selected for second, multi-engine school. Transferred to North Carolina. I can't remember the name of the base that they were, where the school was, but these two start going through their multi-engine flight training. And during the course, what would happen is the students were basically in classroom time Monday through Friday. Sometimes that included, flight line and flight time. You had to learn, there's a nuanced way to handle throttle quadrants for multiple engines. You start getting into like the 4-engine bombers. That's why you really have two guys up there. You got two handling those, one handling those two engines, one handling these two engines, and you got to keep them thrusting the same, and so on and so. There's just it's a balancing act to get a multi-engine plane to fly properly. And so going through that school, my grandpa and his best friend wound up getting assigned to attack aircraft. And their training bed, if you will, their platform, was an early model B-25 Mitchell. And what they realized they were going to be going into was also new at the time, kind of a hot airplane, was the A-20 Havoc. And so they were making their flights in B-25 Mitchells. And recognizing that they were going to be moving into an attack airplane, which means low level and strafing. They had bomb bays, so you had internal bombs. They had wing racks for bombs and rockets. You could put gun packs out there. They had gun configurations in the nose. The bottom line is they had to learn to fly a multi-engine airplane with that nose down attitude without flying it in the ground, but a straight line with a nose down. If you're level and you're squeezing the triggers, you're shooting out over your intended targets because of the ballistic arc of the rounds. But if you're tipped down, then you're shooting into your targets on the ground. These guys had to learn how to do that. It's 1941 heading into 42 and well into 42. And the war is raging. In the Pacific, the Allies took a beating from the Aleutian Islands all the way down to, they were practically in Australia waiting for the Japanese to come across from New Guinea and finish taking over everything before we started turning the tide. So war is raging in the Pacific and the South Pacific. War is raging in Europe. You full blown, the people that flew with Eagle Squadron with the British for a while were now coming back to the States and getting American squadrons. They were standing up and formulating the 8th Air Force. All that stuff is going on. And so war is raging, and these guys know they're going to be thrown into the thick of it very soon. And they wanted to get very, very good at their craft. And so they practiced. When school would let out on Friday, the students would make a beeline for the duty desk, and they would literally, there was slots where they could sign up to take a plane out and fly Friday night, Saturday morning, Sunday morning, through the weekend and go practice their trade before they were back in class on Monday. And they were all encouraged to fly as much as possible. The training track, trying to get pilots with the war kicking off in Blooming, the training track was very short. It was compressed. They went from primary to secondary to into the cockpit in combat. I mean, literally in months. You look at the modern Air Force, modern Navy, and Marine Corps on Army pilot trainings. It's years. We didn't have that luxury back then. So the pilots were encouraged to fly as much as possible. And so Grandpa went out for one weekend, and he signed up to fly his B-25, and he got an early Saturday morning flight scheduled. And what the pilots found was that they were near, I think the name, it's in the documents that are in here, and I wish I'd opened it back up and read it before coming on tonight, but it's called like Lake Meade, I think, in central North Carolina. So they're at this school in North Carolina, and the pilots learned that if they're going to have to learn to fly low and with a nose down attitude, the best place to do that is over water, where if you mess up, you may not totally destroy the airplane, right? Whereas if you ditch it in the ground, so by the way, when they're practicing that, you're firewalled. You have the throttles wide open. You are roaring, because slow, right, is death. Speed is life. You want to get in, get out. You don't want the enemy, because you're low. You are now a viable and easy target. So all that strafing practice is nose down attitude, flying a straight line, strafing low as fast as you can. These are guys with tremendous courage and very large, very brass cojones. That was my grandpa. So these guys go out and they were buzzing Lake Meade. And they would do it at 100 feet. They'd do it at 75 feet was basically their threshold, 100 feet, 75 feet. They'd buzz this lake. And they would practice flying with that nose down attitude, balls to the wall, everything open but the toolbox, and start squeezing triggers, right? You want every forward firing machine gun, rocket, bomb, everything happening. Buzzing Lake Meade. Just so happens that the commanding officer of the whole, not just the schoolhouse, but that training system, was a Army Air Corps full bird colonel who loved to go fishing. Hey, Peter, good to see you in here from London, Ontario, Canada. I'm just wrapping up the story, so stick with us and then you can go back and watch the whole thing in just a minute. So there was this full bird colonel, full bull colonel, as they called him back then, and he loved to go fishing. And he'd go out on Lake Meade in the very wee hours of the morning before the sun was up, and that was his Saturday mornings. And then he'd have all these crazy pilots come out and buzzing that lake at 100 feet, 75 feet, throttles wide open, and he was getting pissed, just to put it bluntly. This colonel was pissed. These pilots were scaring the fish and interrupting his Saturday morning relaxation. So this colonel goes back, and in late February, early March, he releases an order. No more buzzing Lake Meade. If you're going to fly your practice, you must remain. They didn't call it a hard deck, but because of Top Gun, everybody knows the term. So he basically set whatever they call it then, the hard deck at 500 feet. You could not fly lower than 500 feet over Meade Lake. That way you wouldn't interfere with the colonel's fishing on Saturday morning. Well, this particular Saturday morning, my grandpa goes out and he signs for the airplane, does his walk-around inspection. They get in, they fire up the engines and go through all the pre-flight checks, and the aircraft is running solid. It's smooth, it's good. He's cleared, he tacked, he's out for takeoff. Well, it happened to be a very foggy morning that morning, very low cloud cover, and we're talking very low. And Grandpa rolls out in his B-25 and he takes off. And he requests permission and is given permission to make a vector for Meade Lake. So he turns his plane and he climbs out and he gets to around 1,000 feet and he's heading out to the lake, and he decides he's going to start making his practice training runs at 500 feet. So he dives out of 1,000 to 500 feet. When he goes out the other side, he'd climb to about 1,000, 1,200 feet, circle and come back and make another pass, dive to 500 feet. And my grandpa's kind of going, screw this. he can't even see the ground. The cloud cover and the fog is so dense, he can't even see the ground. He's like, I don't, sure, the plane's telling me I'm at 500 feet, but he wants to practice his craft. So after he made about his third pass and he went across this lake, as it turns out in the lake near the center, it's a good sized lake, near the center, it's not really an island, but there was this marshy reed strewn area that was very visible as you flew over it, unless it was cloudy and foggy, but very visible. And Grandpa decided to make that marshy, pussy willow infested thing his target for a run. And he decided that he was going to go ahead and make his run at low level. And when my grandpa was doing this practice run, he made the first one, made the first several at like 500 feet. And his intention was to make that last one before he went back to the barn at about 100 or 75 feet, like all the other pilots were doing before, 175 feet. Well, he comes roaring out of 1,200 feet down to about 100 feet. And he's approaching the lake, and he realizes he's still in the soup, and he can't see a darn thing. He can't even see where that marshy, area is in the center of the lake. So he continues to descend until he was down to about 25 or 30 feet off that lake. Firewalled, nose down attitude. Do you see this warming up yet? And Grandpa goes roaring in his B-25 Mitchell, 25 feet off the lake, and there's the colonel in his boat. And he said it was something like just out of a cartoon. The colonel, startled, rolls over backwards into the lake. Fishing gear goes everywhere. But Grandpa was so low. He was under the fog and the cloud cover. And he was so low that before the colonel fell asshole over elbows into the lake, that he was able to read the buzz number on the side of that airplane. And he went back and made a beeline, soaking wet, for the duty desk to find out who that, ding-dang explanation point, coiled wire, ragus, fragus, ass, or frackin' pilot was that buzzed my lake in my job this morning, fishing. Turns out it was Lieutenant Mankowski. And this colonel went and wrote my grandfather up for failure to obey a lawful order, conduct unbecoming, violating Article 96 of the Code of War. I mean, it just throwing charges at him. And he was brought before a tribunal, and he was tried. He had a military lawyer, and he was found guilty of violating all those articles, writ large, found guilty. And the penalty for being guilty was dismissal from service. It wasn't a reprimand. It wasn't a reduction in rank. It was dismissal from the service. And my grandpa, he didn't want to leave the service, and he got put on legal hold, and he was there after he was found guilty, and he petitioned for redress to go to a higher level courts martial. And he had to go out and hire a civilian lawyer because the military lawyer let him down. And he went out and hired a civilian lawyer and came back, and as what it turned out was, the CO and his witness cadre was a group of yes men. They were all bootlickers, and all that's really kind of outlined in the documents that Bo shared with me as a link off of that live. And these bootlickers all went in there and said, yeah, it was a lawful order. It was promulgated. It was briefed in all the classrooms. All the students knew it. He violated it. And that just wasn't the case. It wasn't actually briefed in the classrooms. The order wasn't promulgated. It was signed, but it wasn't even lawful. They were in a training command. War was raging, and these young men were being asked to learn and practice their coming trade so they would do it well and dispatch the enemy. And this colonel was pissed because it interfered with his Saturday morning fishing. And he finally got it overturned, and it was dismissed. And my grandpa went on to a very distinguished career and gained a reputation as a guy who could really fly an attack plane very, very low. So the first time he ever got in trouble was buzzing the colonel of the training command while he was out fishing one Saturday morning. So low the buzz numbers were visible. And the second time he got in trouble that I know of for it was with the 13th Bomb Squadron in Korea, when he kept bringing a plane back with secondary damage in the belly and then ripped the bell off the front of a North Korean train as he killed it. So I'm very proud of my grandpa and who he was, and one heck of a warrior. I just wanted to share that story with you. Bo Van Lee, thank you for finding that link to the manual for courts martial for the year and the episode that indeed did include my grandfather. My dad told me that story once. I had to go read this to see how well it jived with the family story, because you know how you play the telephone game, things can get skewed. I was wondering how close the story was, and from my grandpa to my dad to me, so not too many links in that telephone game, but pretty accurate story nonetheless. And there's actually a third part to this that maybe in another couple of weeks I'll share with you guys with respect to getting.
We hope you have enjoyed this Infinite Models presentation.